My first memory of sleep paralysis happened when I was 10 years old. I remember because it was the night my parents took me to see Shrek 2 for getting good marks on my report card. It was an evening show, so we got in late, and my mom tucked me straight into bed when we got home. It was around 4 a.m. When I woke up, the light from my alarm clock told me that much. I couldn't feel anything, not my pajamas against my skin, or the warmth of my head against the pillow. I could feel my arms and legs, but they felt heavy, as if a great weight was holding them down. I tried to call out, but I couldn't. My voice caught in my throat, my lips unable to move. I mustered a weak groan that sounded like a cross between a frog's croak and a zombie's moan. But that was it. I thought I was dead, that this is what death feels like, being awake but unable to move or tell anyone. My mind wrestled with the idea of being placed in a coffin, unable to tell anyone I was still alive in here, unable to move or say anything as the lid closed and they put me in the ground, still alive. My fear subsided as I felt my heart thudding in my chest in response to my near panic attack. I also became aware of my breathing, which slowed as the fear subsided. I calmed a little, thinking it was just a dream. That was when I saw him for the first time. Mr. Brown Stick Legs. He huddled in the corner of the room by my closet. His two oversized red eyes glowed in the dark of my bedroom. His face was like a porcelain mask, white, expressionless, with no mouth or nose, only those two haunting red eyes. When he stood up, his body unfolded like origami until his head reached the ceiling. His neck bent, tilting forward as his true height was greater than the height of my room. His long black torso was covered in shimmering symbols that reflected red in the light of his glowing eyes. He stood on two spindly thin legs that disappeared into the shadows of the room. He made no noise as he moved, seeming to glide as he hovered closer to my bed. His long, thin arms reached down to me as I moaned through paralyzed lips. I could not scream, even though I very much wanted to. His fingers reaching through the darkness, down to my face. Two pointed fingers touched against my eyelids, pushing them closed. I remember his fingertips feeling cool, but not cold. Even though the ends of his fingertips looked sharp, his touch was gentle. "Do not struggle, little one. Sleep, sleep," he said. His voice was so deep I could feel it in my chest when he spoke. I did as instructed, convincing myself that it indeed was a dream. Even if it wasn't, the back of my eyelids was more reassuring than looking into those piercing red eyes in his vacant mask of a face. I closed my eyes, wanting it to be a dream, willing it to be a dream. I woke up the next morning, thankfully able to move, walk, and talk. I explained what I saw to my parents, who both agreed that it was a dream. My mom tried floating the idea that something from Shrek 2 scared me, but neither my dad or I bought it. For confirmation, Dad asked that I draw a picture of what I saw for them. As I was drawing, I ran out of black crayon and had to finish his legs with the next darkest color in my crayon box. "Hey there, Mr. Brownstick Legs," my dad said as I handed him the drawing. "You leave my daughter alone now, you hear?" This is how my sleep paralysis demon ended up with the name Mr. Brownstick Legs. Giving him a silly name helped take some of the edge off of going to bed the following night. My dad even did a sweep of the room, calling out for him. "Here, Mr. Brownstick Legs," he said, whistling as if he were calling a dog. It made me giggle, and the whole episode felt more fun than scary. But once they tucked me in and turned off the light, I felt the dread creeping back in. Darkness hits harder when you expect to find something lurking in the shadows. I don't know how long I searched, but I eventually fell asleep. In the weeks following, I searched for Mr. Brownstick Legs every night as I fell asleep. Even when I went to sleepovers, I would do a cursory check in case he tagged along to a friend's house. As time passed, my searches became less frequent. It was a couple months later, The night before my first day of 5th grade, when I woke up to Mr. Brownstick Legs straddled over my bed, his empty plate of a face inches from my own. A scream stuck in my throat, coming out sounding like a gush of air releasing from a pool float. "Hush, child," he said. His voice was deep, echoless. I didn't know how he spoke without a mouth, but I heard him nonetheless. I saw that he held a piece of paper in his thin fingers, crumpled on the edges and torn. He held it up to show me. On the page was a pink blob with blue dots for eyes and a droll red smile and stick lines for legs and arms. It was lying on a blue rectangle. "I found the picture you drew of me, so I drew a picture of you," he said. "Do you like it?" I tried nodding, but I couldn't move. I tried answering, but all that came out was the same dry croaking sound. "Will you draw another one for me? I so liked the first one. You gave me pants. I look good in pants." Again, I was unable to respond or move to give him an answer. He must have been able to read my intent, because he tucked the picture under my pillow before closing my eyes again. When I woke up in the morning, I bolted upright and tossed my pillow off the bed. My heart leapt into my throat when I found the picture. It wasn't a dream. He was real. I went to my desk and began drawing a picture for him, starting with his face and eyes, trying to capture as much detail as I could remember. I had forgotten all about the first day of school until my mom opened my door and found me still in my pajamas. "Lexi!" she yelled, startling me as I was coloring in his eyes. "Your bus will be here in less than an hour. Get dressed now!" I tucked my picture into my school backpack and got dressed. I finished my drawing at recess that day using my brand new Crayola 64 pack that I got with my back-to-school supplies. I gave him blue pants this time, figuring he'd like to see himself in jeans. I wrote his name, Mr. Brownstick Legs, at the bottom of the picture and drew a smiley face next to it, hoping he'd like his nickname. I flipped the paper over to write him a message on the back. I wanted to ask him questions, but didn't want to anger him since he visited me when I was at my most vulnerable. I wrote out my letter on a separate piece of paper before copying it over to the back of my picture. "Dear Mr. Brownstick Legs," that's your name? "My name is Lexi. I am in the 5th grade. What is your name? How old are you? Do you go to school? Why do you visit my bedroom? Why can't I move when you visit? You look scary, but you also seem nice. I hope we can be friends. Love, Lexi PS. I hope you like your blue pants." I added another smiley face at the end of the letter, my final emphasis on wanting to be friends. I considered closing with sincerely, but I figured love was a better, friendlier choice. I tucked the picture under my pillow that night, now anxious to see him rather than filled with dread of his reappearance. But like the last time, he did not return the next day, or the day after. The days stretched into weeks, and every morning I found the picture tucked under my pillow from the night before. It wasn't until Thanksgiving break that I saw him again. My eyes opened as the morning sun poked through the blinds of my bedroom. His body didn't look any different in the light. In fact, his black skin seemed darker, absorbing the sun's rays without giving anything back. His eyes seemed wider than before. If he had a mouth, I would have figured he was smiling. In his slender fingers was the picture I drew for him. "Hello, Lexi," he said. "Thank you for the picture. I do look good in blue pants." I wanted to smile, but, well, sleep paralysis. He flipped the picture over to the side with my letter. "I will answer your questions the best I can. I do not have a name, not one you could ever pronounce, but I am happy for you to call me Mr. Brownstick Legs. As for my age, I exist outside of the construct of time. Therefore, I am ageless. I do not go to school, nor do I know what school is. Why do I visit you? I visit to feed on the energy of your soul." My breath quickened as a mute groan exited my teeth. I wanted to run, wanted to get away from him, but I was pinned down, unable to move. He sensed my uneasiness and tried to calm me by patting my forehead. Let me explain. Have you been to the ocean? It appears vast, almost limitless as you stare out into the blue water, with no visible land on the other side. In my mind, I was standing on a beach. I felt the salty ocean breeze against my face as I looked out over the massive body of water. The waves crashed at my feet. I felt the rush of water over them, followed by the trickle of sand and pebbles as the water drew back. Your soul is like an ocean, child. Vast, limitless, undefinable by words to your understanding. I take only a tiny sip, a single glass of water from a vast ocean. I'm not one who could consume an entire ocean. Dark clouds formed over the water as I stared at the white-capped waves. The clouds unleashed a heavy downpour, turning the horizon gray as rain fell from the sky over the ocean. Just as the rain falls over the ocean, your soul can replenish itself by more than I could ever consume, not even in 1,000 of your years. Does that make you feel better? On the beach in my mind's vision, I nodded. In my bedroom, he nodded back at me. Good. As for your last question, why you cannot move, we are meeting at a point outside of your time, where your world and mine touch. Your physical body cannot move here, but if you persist, you can learn to speak to me with your mind, and I will answer your questions in exchange for your drawings. You can draw pictures of whatever you like. I want to know more of your world. In my mind, I nodded again. This knowledge is a gift, so we can understand one another more. I am not one who would hurt you. He pressed his fingertips to my eyelids again, closing them. In my mind's eye, I was still on the beach, but the sun was setting, and no stars were visible through the rain. I drifted back to sleep to the sound of falling rain. The next morning, I asked my parents for a sketchbook and colored pencils. They tried to hold me off until Christmas, but since I spent most of my afternoons and weekends drawing pictures up in my room, Dad let me open one of my gifts a week early, a Strathmore sketchbook with 100 pages with a 50-pack of Crayola-colored pencils. I started by drawing the rest of my family, Mom, Dad, my little brother Tommy, our cat Libby, and even though he had died, our dog Pancakes. Next, I drew our house, then our car, then my school. I kept drawing anything I could think of, trees, birds, insects, until my sketchbook was full. I used my allowance to purchase more books so I could keep drawing. I honed my craft, redoing my earlier drawings in greater detail. My thoughts considered his wording, "I am not one who could consume an entire ocean." I wanted to ask him if there were those who could, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to know such things. Mr. Brown's stick legs didn't return until my freshman year of high school. To him, it wasn't like any time had passed. I read up on lucid dreaming in the time between visits so that when he returned, I would be better capable of talking to him. He held my book in his hands, flipping through my drawings, doting over the increased refinement of my drawing skills. I had filled a dozen sketch pads and upgraded from Crayola to Prismacolor Premier pencils for my drawings. His biggest surprise was when, after he complimented my drawings, I spoke to him. "Thank you," I said, seeing the words in my mind as I spoke them aloud. If he had a surprised expression, his eyes showed it. "You have been very busy, child," he said. "Do you have any questions you would like to ask?" I hesitated, but finally formed the words in my mind. "Are there creatures who can consume an entire ocean?" He didn't respond right away, which made me think I had not asked properly. As I asked him a second time, he put a finger to my lips as if to shush me. "There are those who can. They are known as the Dark Ones. They are capable of consuming entire souls, emptying them out, leaving them dry and barren. You should not fear them, but you should also not provoke them." His eyes curved downward, as if concerned or afraid. "What do they look like?" I asked. In my mind, my visions were filled with images of great, terrible creatures. Spiders taller than the Empire State Building on thin, spindly legs of shadow and smoke. Tentacled monsters in the seas lofting blue whales like they were toys, ripping them to shreds with their curved chitinous beaks. Great, ghastly flying creatures that knocked over orchards and forests with the beat of their leathery wings. "I showed you only because you ask," Mr. Brownstick-Legs said. "But it is best that we don't talk or think about them. Let them be." I nodded in my mind. He leaned forward and pressed his plate like face to my head, as if to kiss me on the forehead, which was odd since he didn't have a mouth. Then, as usual, he closed my eyes, and I drifted back to sleep. My life took a downturn during the latter years of high school. My dad lost his job, and when the search for a new one dragged on, he turned to drinking to cope with his failure. He wasn't abusive, but he wasn't fun to be around either. In the months following, my parents would hush their arguing when I entered the room, greeting me with smiles as if nothing were wrong. That lasted until the day I came home from school, to them fighting over a foreclosure notice from the bank. We moved out over a weekend from our home in the suburbs to an apartment on the other side of town. I internalized my feelings during that time. I withdrew from my friends and school activities besides the art club, the only one we could still afford. I saw my friends driving to school and hanging out while I rode the bus, too poor and too far out of the way to join in. My tastes began to change as well. Out was the bubblegum pop of Katy Perry, Keha, and Taylor Swift. Instead, I listened to Pierce the Veil, Sleeping with Sirens, and Bring Me the Horizon. My clothes and makeup became darker, more black t-shirts and skirts with black eyeliner and black fingernail polish. Mom called it my goth phase, not that she understood. My drawings became darker too. I moved from colored pencils to charcoal, drawing skulls in gothic-looking cemeteries as my passion for drawing animals and flowers waned. I also drew the dark ones, in great detail, exactly how I remembered them in my mind's eye. Mr. Brownstick-Legs visited me again a month after we moved into the apartment. He looked more at home in my room of black light posters and death metal bands than he did in my previous room. His eyes were dim, not the vibrant red as they were before. He stared at me as I lay in bed, unable to move. He moved inches from my face as I heard his words in my mind. "Your soul tastes different now." He didn't speak of my drawings. I worried that he might, especially since I had been drawing the dark ones. Not only drawing them, but thinking about them, and what type of damage they could do if they were to wake. He seemed sad for me, although reading his expression was difficult with no face. He patted my forehead like before, but didn't close my eyes before leaving as he used to. My life continued its spiraling path like a bottle rocket with a broken stick. My parents didn't talk outside of short conversations about which bills to pay and which ones to ignore. Each night, Dad disappeared into a bottle, while Mom disappeared online to chat with a male Facebook friend she knew from high school. The thing about rock bottom is that it's often a disguise for a trapdoor that drops you to an even lower depth than you thought possible. The first bottom came when my father died. Drove off the road into a gravel pit late at night with an empty bottle of bourbon in the passenger seat. I cried, but it felt hollow. I felt hollow. Even when Mom tried to hold me, I felt nothing inside, not sadness, not guilt, not anything. I disappeared into my sketchbooks, drawing even darker, more disturbing images. Death, dismemberment, vividly accurate vivisections of the cute animals I used to enjoy drawing. My friends no longer talked to me, which was fine because I didn't want to talk to them anymore anyways. I found people to hang out with, not friends, but people who could get me access to moments of chemical-induced euphoria to forget about life for a while. Just like that, the trapdoor opened, dropping me to a new rock bottom of addiction. One thing I had that in common with my dad, but instead of falling into a bottle, I fell into a needle, I stole money from my mom's purse to feed my habits, not that she noticed. She was busy with her old Facebook friend who had moved from online acquaintance to nightly sleepover companion. When the time came to begin my senior year, I didn't bother going back. I kept drawing, filling entire sketchbooks with the dark images that reflected my bleak outlook on life. The dark ones were prevalent subjects during this period of my life. I drew them feasting on humanity, raking flesh from bone in their jagged teeth behind lips of smoke. I came home one night to find my mom and her new male friend in the middle of a fight. It was different from her fights with Dad, more violent, more physical. When he raised his hand at me for trying to intervene, I decided it was time to bolt. I left home, hitching rides with anyone with a set of wheels I could manage to put up with for short periods of time. My preference leaned toward those with access to the chemical release I craved. The more I could numb, the more I could escape. I found certain drug combinations had similar effects to sleep paralysis, where my mind's ability to control my body's action became severed. In those moments of numbed paralysis, I'd see Mr. Brownstick-Legs watching from afar as I dulled the pain. I saw what I perceived as the Dark Ones too, but they weren't hiding in the shadows like Mr. Brownstick-Legs did. They were the shadows. I called out to them as well, for in those moments, I wanted nothing more than to be hollowed out and empty, a void so dark no pain could ever penetrate it. When they didn't answer, I called out to Mr. Brownstick-Legs, but he would vanish every time. Perhaps it was all just a drug-fueled hallucination. Overdosing was never my intention. I was pushing too much, trying to find the edge of the void after feeling so low, so very low, searching for that something extra to filter out the background noise. I took it too far, giving myself a near-lethal dose. At one moment, I was lying next to strangers on a stained mattress in an abandoned warehouse. Then came the initial rush of euphoric bliss. And then, nothing. Whoever I was traveling with at the time dumped me on the curb in front of the ER, making me someone else's problem. This was my rock-bottom moment, although at the time it felt more like freefall. I spent 3 weeks in a coma. I was aware of my surroundings and could hear the doctors and nurses as they checked my vitals and tended to my cleanliness and upkeep, but I couldn't move or speak. At the end of my 3rd week in the ICU on an incubator, I looked up to find Mr. Brownstick-Legs hovering over me, his round red eyes peering through the darkness. "What have you done to yourself, child?" His voice spoke inside my mind. In my mind, I was beside him, standing in the middle of a vast salt-flat desert. The ground was cracked and dry in a hexagonal pattern that stretched in all directions. "This is your soul now. There is nothing left to drink." I heard my beep of my heart rate monitor back in my hospital room speed up as fear entered my mind. "I called out to the Dark Ones," I said. "I asked for them to come. They emptied me out, emptied my soul." "No, my child, you did this. You have not replenished, you have only consumed, and now nothing remains." I dropped to my knees in the middle of the salt as I felt a rumbling deep inside the hollow pit of my stomach. I leaned forward onto my arms, but they were no longer my arms. They were pitch black and empty. I could feel them, but when I looked at them, they were empty voids of smoke and shadow. I stood up on my legs, but they were no longer my legs. The darkness swirled up my torso and down my arms. The emptiness inside me consumed my entire body until only my head remained. What's happening to me? I heard a snap as my arms and legs split, forming 8 black, spindly, thin legs. I collapsed onto them, unable to support myself. Mr. Brownstick-Legs glided down in front of my face, his eyes inches from my own. "As I told you, child, only the Dark Ones have the ability to consume an entire ocean of a soul. That is your fate. That is what you will become." Back in the room, my heart rate monitor crashed to a flat line. I felt the cold darkness swirl up my neck to my head as the void consumed me. I was aware of the nurses and doctors huddled around my body, prepping the crash cart, but all I felt was the cold, consuming what was left of me. "Help me," I uttered. "Please." My physical body jolted from the electric paddles, but I felt nothing. Only the cold darkness. A needle injected into my IV line as they recharged for another burst of electricity. Still, I felt nothing. Only cold, only darkness, only the vast emptiness of the void. Mr. Brown Sticklegs tilted his head as he stared through his unblinking red eyes. He leaned forward, pressing his plate-like face to my forehead. I felt a vibration against my skin, followed by the tingling sensation of heat returning. The darkness receded back down my arms and legs. As he pulled back, the red in his eyes had diminished. A gift for the girl who gave me pants. A tear formed in my eye. It rolled down my cheek and fell onto the parched landscape below. Before I could say anything, an electronic jolt coursed through my body, pulling me away from the salt-flat expanse and back to my hospital room. The sinus rhythm of my heart rate monitor returned to normal. I felt the cool gel of the defibrillator paddles against my chest. I remember squeezing the hand of one of the attending nurses, who smiled down at me. "Look who's awake," I cried, but it was different than before. I felt the pain I had long been avoiding, but I felt something else as well. I felt grateful, and I felt a sense of hope I hadn't known in a long time. It was a long road back from the darkness, but the thing about the road to recovery is that, like a road, it leads to a destination. After years of listless drifting towards the void, having a destination was an important first step in finding self-love. I reconnected with my mother, who was struggling with her own form of the darkness. We leaned on one another, talking and going to therapy as we worked through the issues that drove us apart. After my release from the hospital, I moved back home with her, her Facebook friend long gone. I got my GED and used my many sketchbooks as a portfolio to get an apprenticeship at a tattoo parlor. I've been clean for 4 years now, and it feels good to smile again. Granted, I still prefer Pierce the Veil to anything from Katy Perry's catalog, and my tattoos and jewelry have more skulls than fluffy bunnies, but that's all on the surface. I no longer crave the darkness to consume me. I often think about the vision with Mr. Brown Sticklegs on the salt flats that night in the hospital. I had not seen him since that night, and I often wonder about the state of my soul since that day. Has it replenished, or is it still the dried-up barren wasteland that he took me to on the night? Last night, around 3 in the morning, I finally got my answer. I woke up with a heaviness on my chest, arms and legs. At first, I felt the grips of fear grabbing hold, much like the first time I experienced it. But then, in the dark corner of my room, I saw glowing red eyes staring back at me from the shadows. In spite of my sleep paralysis, couldn't help but smile when I heard his voice call out to me. "Child, your soul tastes much better now." I want to say up front for the record that I have zero belief in the paranormal, and I believe all of what I'm about to tell you is simply a product of the amazing human brain. That said, I realize others will think differently and appreciate this story, and it doesn't mean this whole thing hasn't ever creeped me out. It did and does. Anyway, as I said, I work overnight at a funeral home. Basically, I babysit the place by myself all night. If someone croaks in the night, I'm there to answer the phones and dispatch someone for the body. I clean up a little and get a few things ready for funerals the next day. Not the most glamorous job, but the job market sucks right now. And even with my few duties, I end up with hours to kill every night. I'm not technically supposed to sleep on the job. That said, sometimes I do. I'll nod off at the desk, or sometimes I'll go lay down on one of the couches and take a power nap. I'm alone all night, other than a handful of bodies in different rooms, and it's boring. I think most people would do the same. The weird thing is, I get sleep paralysis pretty regularly when I fall asleep at work. Although there have been very few times when someone has shown up at the funeral home in the middle of the night unannounced, I'm always fearful one of the directors will show up unexpectedly and catch me sleeping. I believe this fear causes me to sleep lightly and to have sleep paralysis because I rarely have it at home. Now, for those of you who have never had sleep paralysis, basically it's like this. Your eyes are open and you're seeing your surroundings, but you're not actually awake. So sometimes you still see or hear dream things, like maybe you see something that isn't there, or whatever, and you can't move. It feels as though you're being held down, and you can't wake up. It feels as if you are straining against something when you try. For myself, I can usually snap myself out of it, and wake up if I strain and thrash against it hard enough, and then I come awake suddenly and am able to move. Google it if you want more information about it. It's interesting. Now, on to the weirdness that began to happen when I would slip into sleep paralysis during a nap. The first was the music. Sometimes when I would find myself lying there with my eyes open in sleep paralysis, I would begin to hear music loudly and vividly. It was almost always Christian gospel music, but modern stuff like you'd hear on the radio. It always sounded like it was coming from inside my skull, too, particularly my mouth area. This sounds stupid, but at one point, I even began to wonder if I was picking up some AM Christian station in my fillings and was only sensitive enough to hear it while asleep, or maybe when my mouth was hanging open and dried out. I even went so far as to remember one of the lyrics from one of the songs and Google it when I woke up, although it didn't appear to be a real song. Sorry, I don't remember the lyric anymore, as this was months and months ago. Then, the weirder things started happening. Sometimes when I'd fall into this sleep paralysis, I would think I heard someone walking toward me from one of the hallways. Fearing that an employee had shown up unexpectedly, I would always frantically strain against the sleep paralysis and wake up, at which point the sound of footsteps was gone. After that, I always felt foolish for getting tricked by dream sounds. This went on for months and months, the music and the footsteps. Always when I'd hear the footsteps, I'd err on the side of caution and force myself awake in case it really was another employee, only to be annoyed at having gone through the effort for nothing and having ruined a perfectly good nap. One night, while I was particularly tired and napping on a couch, I slipped into this state and heard the footsteps. I decided, screw it. I wasn't going to get tricked by my sleep paralysis for the millionth time. So I just laid there, expecting I would either eventually wake up normally, without the strain, or I would go back to full sleep, or that the stupid footsteps would continue the way the music always did if I just laid there, stuck in that state for a bit. Nope. To my complete surprise, the footstepper showed himself. I was laying on my back, stretched out, and a man came walking up from the direction of my head, coming into my field of view and stopping directly next to me. There was nothing particularly memorable about him, just a white male in some kind of dress shirt and slacks, except for one thing: his face and head were obscured. They were blurred out, just like they do on the news for anonymous witnesses or whatever. Just like that. His head and face were obviously there, but I could see nothing but a smeary blur. Then, to my horror, he reached out and poked me lightly in the forehead and let out a kind of sinister chuckle. Sinister is probably the wrong word. It was more like he was laughing, as if to say, "Yeah, feel real brave now, don't you?" And at that point, of course, I snapped myself awake and found myself alone as always. It was very disturbing, of course, to say the least. Probably not as much for most, though, to be honest, because I truly have no belief in ghosts or the paranormal and chalked it up to brain tricks. But since then, it's happened twice more. The second time I saw someone, I found myself with my eyes open in sleep paralysis, staring at, I shit you not, a woman wearing a rubber clown mask and holding a gun at her side, just staring at me passively. Thankfully, I knew immediately that it was just my sleep paralysis and didn't panic, but I was unnerved enough to force myself awake and cause the woman to vanish. The third time was similar to the first. I was laying on the couch, and this time a small child approached me from behind. I think it was a boy, but can't say for sure, probably about 6 or 7, and his face was also blurred the same way the man's had been. He giggled once in amusement. I was immediately scared to the point I forced myself awake. Of all the times it had happened, that was the most disturbing by far. And that's it. That's my story. Sorry it doesn't have a better resolution, but as I said, this is all true, and I don't really believe there's anything paranormal going on here. But it is fucking freaky, no? Last night was the worst sleep paralysis episode I've ever had. I'm 21 years old, and I've been enduring these episodes for the past 3 years non-stop. At one point, I was getting it every night, and as a result, I would purposely stay up in order to not go through it again, which resulted in me being diagnosed with insomnia. I've gone 3 days without sleep, all because I've been too scared to go through it again. Last night before I went to sleep, something felt strange and off. I believe in the paranormal and have had crazy amounts of experiences all throughout my life, so as I was going to bed, I told myself I wouldn't be surprised if I went through an episode that night. Now, since I go through this way too many times, I sleep with a strong flashlight, some type of noise in the background, and I never sleep on my back. As I started drifting into sleep, I had a strange and eerie dream. I was sleeping in my room, but I could see people I knew sitting at the foot of my bed just staring at me. There was someone from high school that also just sat there, but instead of staring, they were taking pictures of me, sleeping. I was sleeping on my side, and I started hearing a really loud buzz and a clock ticking really loudly, which terrified me because I don't have a clock in my room nor anything that buzzes. I opened my eyes for just a second and realized something was off. I was stuck, and I started to panic because usually I can try to move a finger or two to help with waking up, but this time I couldn't move at all. I was frozen. I shut my eyes as quick as I could, and a few seconds later, the ticking clock started getting louder. I heard someone screaming in the distance, and suddenly, I felt something lay down next to me. I teared up. What's happening? Why does this feel so real? Why can't I move a finger, a toe, anything? But most importantly, who's laying next to me? I tried calling out for my mom, but of course, nothing came out. I don't even live with my mom, but I wanted to feel some type of sense of security. Usually when I attempt to call for someone, I can get a small peep out of me. But this time again, I was completely stuck. Suddenly, whatever was laying next to me started caressing my hair, and I could feel its hand going down my face to my collarbones. It felt so real. I was shocked and absolutely terrified. Some quick backstory. My sleep paralysis episodes are always the same. It's always just a silhouette that enters my room and gets closer and closer to me each time, but I can never see its face. The last time this happened, it was standing right in front of me next to my bed, with its hands reaching at me until I frantically managed to wake up. After it was done touching my hair and face, it put its arms around me as if it were trying to cuddle me and make me the little spoon. I tried getting out of its arms, but I couldn't, and when I heard it chuckle, I froze. I said my ex-boyfriend's name, and when it chuckled, it sounded exactly like him. "What are you doing?" it responded. "I'm trying to hold you. What are you doing? Why do you keep moving? Don't you want me to hold you? You love when I hold you." It wouldn't let me go. I was frozen. I was scared. Never has it spoken. Never has it touched me. I kept trying to shake and get out of its arms, and it pulled me on top of him. My back was on its stomach, and I could feel Arthur's beard on the side of my face. "It's me, I swear." It pulled my hand and made me touch its hair. It has really curly hair, and he styles it in such a specific way. I knew right away, as I felt it, that it was his hair. Please, you're hurting me. No, I'm not. Stop. Why are you being such a baby? Of course, I already knew this wasn't actually him, but the fact that he was denying that he was hurting me made me believe it even more. When the real and I used to play wrestle, if I told him he's actually hurting me, he backs off and apologizes profusely. The thing set me back down on my side, and I opened my eyes just a bit and swallowed a shriek when I saw my little brother standing next to me by my bed. He didn't say anything, just stared. At this point, I was bawling, and my brother and I are super close, so I would never dream of doing this for real. But I panicked. I didn't know what to do. This was the longest episode I've ever had. I managed to find some strength, and I shoved my hand at my brother to grab his shirt and push him back as hard as I could. I didn't have a plan. I could feel the tears rolling down the side of my face as my brother got up and mumbled, "Why are you being so mean?" After a few seconds of trying to grab him and push him back again, he started to disappear into thin air, and I could feel the arms start letting go of me. I was no longer being held aggressively. Before left, he whispered into my ear, "What are you gonna do now? Cry about it. Who's gonna believe you?" I felt even more tears go down my face, as I've heard those exact words before when I was younger and went through a traumatic experience. All of a sudden, everything stopped. I laid there on my side. I was crying. I could feel how drenched my pillow was from my tears. It was 3:30 a.m. I turned on the room light, took a sleeping pill, and waited until 4 a.m. to fall back asleep. The next morning, I called my dad and told him all about what happened to me the night before. "That's weird," he said. "I woke up at 3:30 last night too. I felt someone was staring at me, and when I turned on the lamp, I saw you standing at the foot of my bed, just smiling at me. I thought you came home and wanted to say goodnight or something, but you just never said anything. Never has the silhouette done something like this. I never thought it would go that far. But this thing created itself into two of the people that mean the most in my life to me. Part of me doesn't think it was the silhouette. Part of me thinks it was a demon disguising itself into people I loved dearly. I don't know. I'm scared. I'm not gonna sleep tonight."